Okay, welcome back to the AEC Hive podcast, where we're talking about innovation in architecture, engineering, and construction. I'm Ralph Montague, co-founder at AEC Hive. I'm the director at Archdocs as well. I'm joined by John Egan from BIM Launcher. John, do you want to say hi to everybody?
Hi everyone, John Egan here, co-founder at AEC Hive, CEO at BIM Launcher. I'm really looking forward to talking to Simon today. We go way back, so I'm looking forward to hearing about his journey and having him share a bit more about that with you, the community. So thanks.
So we're very excited today to be joined by Simon Moreau from Bouygues Immobilier from France, the real estate division of Bouygues. Simon, if you'd like to give us a short introduction to yourself, to your business, to doing, and then we can talk about innovation.
Thanks, and thanks for having me on this show. Really looking forward to it. So my name is Simon, and I'm working for Bouygues Immobilier, which, as you say, it's a real estate branch of one of the largest construction and real estate group in France. I wasn't expecting to end up at a real estate company, actually. I came from an engineering background. I've worked since I graduated, actually, in various engineering firms in France, doing what was generally called BIM manager, but in practice, my actual role changed a bit during the year. I started for an engineering firm that was doing a large project in the Middle East. I work with, I actually worked with quite weird software like Katia, for example. And but after that, I joined a more traditional French engineering firm where I have designed hospitals, healthcare facilities, sort of things. And afterwards, one of my clients at the time, Bouygues Immobilier, asked me if I wanted to join them to help them how BIM could be useful for a real estate developer. And so I joined them and I helped them develop their BIM capabilities for commercial buildings. And since 2 years ago, and since one of my, let's say, ideas was BIM managers are gonna disappear, I wanted to walk the path, and I become myself a real estate developer. And so I'm now working as it's called a MOTC. I won't bother you with what this means in French, but I'm basically the technical manager for the project at Bouygues Immobilier, and I'm working with architects and engineers during the design phase. So I'm not a BIM manager anymore.
Very good. That's fantastic. Why would a real estate developer be interested in BIM? Because when people think about real estate developers in general, they're quite conservative, probably more interested in the physical than the digital. What's the key driver for Bouygues Immobilier to even think about BIM?
I'm not sure they will even have an answer for this question when they hire me. And this, I think this is still a really valid question. It's not obvious. Since Bouygues Immobilier as a real estate developer is part of a larger construction group. So as a real estate developer, we have, might say, a technical mindset. And so we are rather technical subject in the building, construction, design, and so on, more than I say an average real estate developer. And they wanted to understand this new trend and see what could be done. And actually, what I realized working at Bouygues Immobilier is that for me, model-based design and model-based workflow are becoming the norm. And as a real estate developer, we have to review the project, understand what's going on the design. And so if we are still hooked up to PDF and 2D drawing with the design, if the design is developed using models. And so the idea was to enable Bouygues Immobilier, enable my colleagues to, let's say, open the model, see it, understand what was going on, and actually use the model to do the day-to-day job. So what I'm doing right now, I might say review the design, ensuring that the design it's aligned with let's say the commercial and marketing strategy. And I wanted to push the idea of BIM as a management and project management tool for the real estate.
And I suppose the company is involved in the full life cycle. So if you're employing designers to design your developments, you have your own construction arm that's going to construct those developments. And do you also have a division that's operating or looking after those developments?
Actually, we don't. We are not necessarily having our construction branch build.
Okay.
We publish tender. We publish a tender, and
okay.
even other construction company can and mostly build our own project. And we don't really manage the building. We sell the building as we build them. So we don't really have the whole exploitation part. But we have more and more clients, especially in the commercial buildings, who want to be able to at least have some comprehensive model of the building they are buying. And so we have a bunch of clients who wanted to have a model with things like attached specification sheet, this sort of thing. And so we as a real estate developer, we have to negotiate this sort of addition to the building and make sure that the engineering firms and contractors provide these models. We are not owning any buildings, and so we don't really need to manage them directly.
Yeah. Okay. But of course, I mean, every building you develop does have to be managed by somebody.
Yes.
In the end, and I suppose whoever ends up having to manage those buildings would prefer, digital data versus lots of paper drawings or.
Exactly, and it's a good commercial practice to provide them with these models, even if they don't ask them directly or if they don't really want such a technical thing. But well, the idea is we think that now it's good practice to provide such models, so we make sure that we have them at the end to give along the drawing and the actual building.
Yeah. The sort of primary theme of AC Hive is about innovation in this sector. So where do you see within your practice in real estate development, what's difficult and what's the areas you feel need a lot of innovation, and which are the areas that you feel are working quite well, where innovation is quite progressive?
Well, you say it, and I think that's the case for Bouygues Immobilier as well. Real estate developers are quite conservative. It's a risk management business. You have to handle large, complex projects. So obviously, it's tend to make you a bit conservative. On the other hand, our clients want more innovative things in general, and the BIM models and so on are part of it. What's difficult? Well, obviously changing is always difficult. I think for me, when I was, let's say, pushing building information modeling at Bouygues Immobilier, the really difficult thing was to actually provide some value while using these models. It's not always obvious that using a 3D model just for the sake of it, it's actually provide values for my colleague. And now that I'm actually doing the job of a real estate developer, technical manager for a real estate developer, I tend to to realize that I actually need the model for some specific task. And let's say, I don't know, understand how a complex stairs will work, for example. But for other purpose, like, let's say, how the room areas are organized, I'd rather have, let's say, an Excel spreadsheet or a nicely correlated 2D drawings instead of an actual 3D models, and really pinpoint for each job which tool was the better suited without having my own bias towards 3D models. What was actually a real challenge. You have to understand the job of the one you're supposed to help and sort things out between useful innovations that provide values and actually helps people, and innovations for the sake of innovation, where you force BIM model to people who don't really need them. I try to keep the balance, and this might sound quite conservative, by the way, but I really think that it's especially for a real estate developer, building information modeling, it's not all, well, 3D model more specifically is not always the perfect solution, and I try to keep a proper balance between, let's say, traditional representation of a building, 2D drawings, and 3D modelings, and trying to find the balance between convenience, ease of use, let's say, accuracy, and so on.
Yeah. Well, I suppose just as you were talking about that, I mean, my thought there was, there's a number of ways you could produce those different outputs that you described there, like the room schedule, the colored floor plan, and the 3D model. One way is you could produce each of those separately, or you could produce the 3D model first and let the 3D model generate a colored plan output or a schedule. And the outcome of those two ways of doing it, the output's the same, but the effort in doing those three things separately is obviously a lot more if you do them as separate exercises. Whereas if you produce the 3D model first and let the model generate the outputs, it's a lot quicker and a lot more accurate because it's obviously the same thing. And maybe a lot of people who aren't involved in the actual creation of outputs don't understand that. So they just look at the output and say, well, I just want a colored plan, or I just want a schedule, or I just want this, and not understanding that producing each of those things separately is a lot more time and a lot more effort, and there's a lot more opportunity for errors between those outputs if you do them as separate exercises. Would you say that's the case, that people outside of architecture and engineering who are involved in the BIM process probably don't understand the difference of the level of input required and the sort of connectedness between all those outputs and the importance of the connectedness? This
is something I had to explain to my colleague, also explain to architects and engineers we were working with. And obviously the idea was to have them use a model and extract all the necessary information like colored plans and schedule and so on, and from a model. But I also had to make sure that what I was asking as a client was not, say, too difficult, too complex, and even sometimes it was, in specific cases, it was more efficient for an architect to, I don't know, say, not draw the full model, to just give me a few sketch of a detail of a solutions before actually modeling. In the case, for example, we had some issue with mechanical models where we tend to ask way too much, way too early, and we end up with really large MEP models at early stage that were thrown away just a few months later because the requirement changed and the whole model was to be cast away and start again. And so we really had some, as a client, of engineering and architecture firms, we really had to be disciplined to be able to understand what we were asking when we were asking 3D models, understand what we could get from these models, what was the benefits, and also what was the trade-off. Not ask complex 3D models at the very early stage of the product of the project, because even if as a client we can't ask an engineering firm to redo 10 times a mechanical or an MBP model, and so we had a few months, year of back and forth between engineering firms and architect firms and us to really understand the level of detail and the level of development that was necessary for the development of the project, but without asking too much. We were trying to really, improve how we design things and really pinpoint what is necessary to find in the model at each step and not overdo it.
So the innovation you're talking about there is not even technical. It's more around the process of, what to ask for, when to ask for it, to make sure that what you ask for is not going to be thrown away. So the whole approach and the process is almost the innovation besides the technology. The technology is just supporting.
I think my only, technological contribution at Bouygues Immobilier was to make them buy a web-based IFC viewer, and that's it. It was useful, but from a technical standpoint, it was not almost trivial. But from the organizational and process perspective, I think that's where the real challenge was.
Of course, in your personal capacity, you've obviously been heavily involved in innovation for a number of years as a BIM manager and developing your own plugins and tools, and you're sort of at the forefront of innovation. Would you say when you look at the sector, in both designers, contractors, real estate developers, it would be our feeling that the sector is quite low in innovation at a broad level. I mean, there's incredible things happening, of course, in projects, in the way we build each individual project, but sometimes that innovation doesn't find its way out into the broader sector. So, I mean, is that do you share that sort of sense of a low level of innovation in general?
I can't really say. Obviously, I agree with you, and I think the whole AEC business industry is rather conservative for good reason. I think we manage one of the most complex projects people can make, buildings and infrastructure, and so there is good reason to be conservative. And you just have to look at failed infrastructure project to understand that it's no picnic to make such buildings or infrastructure. But I don't see, from my whole short career, I haven't seen any real, revolutions around design or constructions. For me, this whole building information modeling thing and it's more an evolution of what we were doing before. My point is, even with these new tools, we are still designing buildings, doing more or less the same work. Might say engineering are still doing more or less the same work. Contractors arrive more or less at the same moment. And I don't really see these tools for now, actually, as really enable us to evolve as an industry. Well, maybe evolve, but this is for me, it's really not a revolution. When you can see that, for example, in the, media and entertainment industry, where tools like, video streaming that's completely transform their business, with with Hollywood producer being conquered by Netflix and these sort of things. I don't really see this happening in the building industry. My own group exists since I think it's the 50s, after the Second World War, and they're still architects, engineers, and they produce tenders, and tenders are sent to contractors, and contractors build things, and they hand over this to the real estate who hold them in the first place. And there is for me, no real transformation in the building industry. But on the other end, I also think that the tool we use are evolving a bit slowly to my taste, but obviously evolving.
So what would you like to see? Like you mentioned the example of streaming in the media industry. Like, would you like to see streaming design data, where data goes straight from the architect to the contractor and never finds its way onto a piece of paper?
Well, actually, we tried to do that. It was not really a success for many reasons. Yeah. No, what I think will be transformative, and we can, I hope will be transformative, and it's the equivalent of the library for the software industry. Maybe I can explain that a bit more. When you create a software, and this is something I discover on my hobby side. When you build a software, you don't start with a blank file and you start typing line of code in this blank file. You actually more like finding piece of code around mostly the internet and buying or having them for free, and you assemble them, and you build a new software, but no software exists without some groundwork made by other. And actually, I think every software developer today is standing on the shoulder of giants and can make things like Netflix, for example, or anything else. And the reusability of code has made this possible. But on the other hand, for an architect, always start with a purely blank page. If he's lucky, he has some survey. But you can't really say, last time this solution was really efficient, let's reuse that. No, you can't do that when you are an architect. You have to redraw, restart, almost reinvent the wheel at each time you start a new project.
Well, you don't have to, but you're almost forced to.
Yeah. It's really difficult. I think the tool we are using, I'm mostly using Revit, but it's the same issue with AutoCAD, or even I work with Katia. It's almost the same issue. You don't have technical solution package as, let's say, Revit families. Maybe you can find a Revit families that's represent. I'm talking about Revit because it's something I'm most used to, but this is relevant for any other BIM software. When you picked a Revit family, it's not actually a building solution. It's, let's say, it just represents something. You pick a chair and you place it in your models. But you can't say, oh, last time I designed this really efficient office layout. Let's use that again. And you can actually use it again, but you will have to redraw it and almost redesign it from the ground up. And tools like Revit are not really helpful when it came to, let's apply this really good solution that works before. And it became even worse when you try to share your technical solutions with others. I've never seen an architecture or an engineering firm sharing their technical solutions with others, whether it's for free or for money. But this is common practice in, for example, the software industry. And I think it's mostly because it's the technical solution is actually living in the head of the chief architect or the engineers that's design it. And, you can't easily share that with a lot of people. And so I'm pretty hopeful that solutions that can transform this expertise as little piece of, let's say, really clever Revit families, but I don't think Revit families will be the actual solution, but be able to, let's say, transform this expertise as software and be able to share it with the whole world. This will really change how we design and build.
Yeah, I actually like that analogy of yours of the software code blocks, if you like. Yeah, because if you think of the components of a building or piece of infrastructure, the individual products and materials that are assembled together to make any building. Those are not unique. Like, in order for a product to get onto the market, it has to go through years of testing and development. And so, while each building is unique in the way those are brought together, the actual components are well established and are the same or similar on most products. And I think, like that, as an architect, I always found it frustrating that you in the beginning of a project, you're drawing doors and windows and toilets and bathrooms and showers as conceptual things, which will happen in the future, and all those will be changed for actual doors, actual showers, actual basins sometime in the future of the project. And what a waste of time. Wouldn't it have been easier if I had a library of components that I could pick from, actual manufacturing components, and assemble my designs and not put my time into drawing things that are going to be thrown away, but put my time into how to bring those components together. And that's really the value that the architects and engineers bring is the how to assemble and how to connect the different components. But unfortunately, at the moment, you can't get that manufacturer's information easily, and the only time to get it is when a contractor has a contract to go and buy those products. That's the only time the manufacturers will speak to you, and in general. So, I think the whole thing needs to be turned on its head. The manufacturers have to say, we've got to make our products available to people so that they can use them in designs and not have to just put representative stuff. That might be the start of how the industry changes. That when manufacturers take more of a proactive role in supplying information.
And I also think that this could really enable innovation in the, let's say, in the other part of the AEC industry. Because if you have, let's say, a good waterproofing solution for your roof, you are a waterproofing manufacturer and you have a good solutions, you have to find the engineers that can actually design integrate your waterproofing solution in the design. You have to convince them that your solution is perfect for their buildings. You have a bunch of problems to actually have your even great waterproofing solution actually implemented in new buildings. And I think that if, as an engineer, you just have to pick up from a library, this new fancy waterproofing solution, and realize instantly with your software that this solution will be perfect for your buildings, this will really increase the rate of innovation in the building industry, and the speed at which this innovation in particular product or component are spread through the market. And also I think if it's the same thing for when people have, I don't know, for example, good solution for, I don't know, the global shape of a building to make sure that we are energy efficient, instead of having to train thousands of engineers over the years to how to design such buildings. You can just send this new solution as a piece of code, and everybody can or cannot use it on their old buildings. But I really think the ability to package technical solutions in little block of code can really enable an entire new ecosystem of innovation in general in the building industry.
Fascinating idea. John, you said you've known Simon for a while. Like, how did you meet, and what was your common area of interest?
Simon runs a website called bin42.com, and it was always an interesting site to visit because there was always small tools that were very focused on specific problems that I can only assume he came up against during his day-to-day work, his working processes. And I always found it fascinating how small and focused on specific tasks. And I always imagined the future of tooling in the construction industry is this move from these monolithic big applications that try to do everything down to these microscopic modular tools that consume and produce data to a specific problem. And why I got in touch with Simon originally, as far as I recall, now Simon, you could probably correct me if this is wrong, was just to touch base with him and get to understand his background and what his driver was for creating these small tools. Is that what you remember, Simon?
Yeah. That's a few years ago now. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, just meeting at last.
Yeah.
And would you say that's the case? Is the future of tools, as you call them in the AEC, going towards a much more diverse set of smaller tools that you pick and choose from as you need them, rather than these?
Yes. I can't imagine a future where Autodesk can have all the solutions. It's for example, I won't go into Autodesk specifically, but you see, one company can't have all the solutions. Today, Autodesk is, in my point, for Revit, and I think it's the same problem for every other, let's say, architecture software. These software companies have, I think, a really tough problems because they have to provide solutions specific enough to be really useful to people who actually draw buildings, but general enough to have a large customer base. And so we end up with really large solutions, like, for example, Revit, that can appeal to a large market worldwide, but this solution will never be specific enough to be really, really useful for, let's say, a French architect specialized in two-story buildings for small real estate developer. You see. And I think the proper way to go it's something more like some infrastructure, let's say software infrastructure. And Revit kind of did that by opening the API, the ability for everybody to create plugin for Revit. And we as an industry, we need some sort of a software infrastructure. It can be common file data like IFC, but also we need common software, actually common code, and let everybody in the industry, in the entire world, build their own really small tool, really focused on their actual job. And I think that's what's happening in the software industry. For example, I'm mostly working with C#, which is a language developed by Microsoft, and this is part of a framework called .NET. And we might say .NET as some sort of a foundation base for everybody to develop software, and build on the .NET. There is a lot of, let's say, software parts, code parts that every developer can rely upon, use, and integrate, and to finally create their very own little software. It's what I'm trying to do, and I think that we are missing, or we don't yet have a really great, let's say, software infrastructure in the building industry. I think Revit started maybe it was a good start 20 years ago now, but in 20 years there's been a lot of plugins developed with Revit, but I think there is still limitation to the way Revit is actually handling things. Like you still have to actually draw a wall. You can't really, draw a room and the wall will be drawn around automatically. There is limitations on how Revit works. That's limited also the people who are designing plugins, even if they are generally. Well, I have seen many Revit plugins that are very clever to get around Revit limitations. I think we really need some form of more open infrastructure to let everybody build their own tool upon this infrastructure. And we can't really expect some 25 young graduates interested in code like me when I was in this engineering firm, to be able to rebuild from the ground up a complete software infrastructure. A young building engineer must have some sort of infrastructure to be able to build his own tool on.
Mm-hmm. I suppose the other challenge that the software companies have, like Revit and ArchiCAD, is that they're trying to meet the needs of two groups of people. So a group of people who are more interested in producing outputs like 2D drawings and schedules, using a 3D model process, but their focus is on the outputs, so that those people can still operate within the traditional systems, if you like, in the AEC sector, and at the same time produce a piece of software that is thinking towards the future of not using paper-based documents, because that has to be the future. Obviously, we must get rid of paper. Because as soon as you put something on a piece of paper, the next minute it's out of date. That's part of the problem. People are walking around sites with drawings that are 6 weeks old.
Yeah, it's true, but I'm not that sure about that. It's relatively easy today, almost, to, let's say, produce drawings from Revit, and nonetheless having a rather nice model. And this can be improved. I'm actually sure that when we exchange models between, let's say, an architect and engineers, the only way to do it is to exchange the whole file. You can't really send to the structural engineers only the information useful for his own job. And so whether it's a drawing or it's a model, the structural engineers has to dig through the architecture model to take what it needs. And I think that with more, let's say, more diverse tools and maybe more open and all built upon a common platform, this tool could be able to, for example, produce only the data necessary for a specific, specific engineer, for example, I don't know. For example, that was something that was really difficult when I was engineers. We spent days, weeks just to retrieve the architecture models and sort everything out and have nice drawings to be able to finally draw, let's say, ducts and pipe on it. But for the most part, the only interesting piece of information in this model were actually in the room, the Revit room, where we have the name and the area and this sort of things. And so I think that's in a really efficient, well, not really efficient, but more efficient way, we should have the ability to, as let's say, mechanical engineers, to send our request to the architect as code, and the architect sends us back the data. And since we send the requirement as code, we have all the data we need directly in the format we need. And this could be done if we have the ability to, let's say, extract from every model only the data that we need. I think that was the idea behind, maybe you know that I think that was the idea behind I think it's MDV, right? John, yes, that's it. The concept behind the IFC specification, where you could theoretically produce a sub model, what might say, well, an IFC model containing only the information required for a specific person in the process. I think that's the idea, John.
Yeah. Yes, that's the idea. And have you ever tried to use the MVD tooling to describe a specification? That's another kettle of fish.
I'm not even sure. I haven't ever seen a software that's actually using this, has this one intended in the first place.
For good reason. So IFC is moving. There are many initiatives around IFC JSON now. So, like parsing IFCs to XML and JSON, and then we're actually seeing an introduction of tooling that was built for the software engineering world, entering the arena where, because it's not just a case of just defining a specification, it's actually building all the tooling around that specification, such as, for example, how do we generate that specification? So for example, how does the architect say, hey, Mr. Engineer, I want the room, just this room, for example, or all rooms that meet this criteria? How does, I suppose, how do they validate that it's valid? How do they, exchange that schema? How do they have a contract between the architect and engineer, which, somehow validates the information as it's being exchanged between both parties? I think that we'll see in the next 5 years an increasing use of that concept of MVD. Whether we see MVD as it is today in the industry is another thing.
And I also think that the idea of that I was a proponent of, actually, but one can change its mind. The idea of every building information in one single magnificent model at the center of everything was actually misleading, and maybe pushes back a little.
And maybe the language as well of IDMs and MVDs is not helpful. Because the way I think of it, it's like I love my food. So when you want to make a nice meal, you write a recipe that sets out some ingredients that you need and what you're going to do with those ingredients. And then you go to the shop with a list of ingredients. You don't need everything in the shop. You just need those 5 or 6 ingredients. So that's the whole model, the IFC of everything is like the supermarket, and the MVD is like the shopping list that
Yes.
tells you these are the 6 ingredients I need to make this meal, and the IDM is the recipe of making the meal, what you're meant to do, what's the use case, what's the business case, what are you going to do with that information. I think we have to start explaining this to people in sort of language that they can understand, because that makes sense to me, as someone who loves food. That you have a business process, which is the recipe. You have an MVD, which is a shopping list, and you have the act of going to the shops and fetching what you want. Then you can validate it as well, because you can get to the till, and if what you get from the till list is the same as your shopping list, then you know you're going to have a good meal.
And I think we also need software tools like actually push these ideas forward, because on the day-to-day work, architects and engineers use tools, and I think these tools really drive how they are working, and I think tools like Revit, with their idea of, well, more or less everything in the same models, really drive the process around it.
Yeah, so that was a point that I wanted to come back to, around your point before about how you changed your idea from everything being in one model to everything perhaps not being in one model and somehow linked. And to go back to your point as well, Ralph, about the language that we communicate around these different ideas, I wanted to give an example of another discussion point that I was engaging with someone else. They spoke about federated models, and one misconception that I found about this concept of a federated model is that you bring multiple models from different places into one, and that's typically how it's been sold. Well, that I've typically thought about it. But increasingly, the more I think about it, I think a federated model is not about all the components being in one place. It's more about all the components being connected. So let's say, for instance, if you have windows in one system, you have flooring in another, and roofs and walls in another, the federated model does not, have to pull those all into one place, but merely have a connection between those, between the different systems that are hosting those components. And maybe and it's quite likely that the evolution of the tooling around the contracts that we just spoke about between architects and structural engineers, having been able to very explicitly define one another. If we had some sort of contractual middleware between these different systems that could be perhaps hosted by different stakeholders, the very implementation of a system to essentially join up all these dots could be the new definition of federated models. So, I think that it's just really interesting to hear us banging this drum about an evolution in the language that we've been using over the last, we've heard language in this podcast that span back to 100 years probably, because we're talking about buildings, but in the digital world, it's just evolving continuously. That's something as well, Ralph, you and I have been talking quite a lot about is language and the evolution of that,
and also getting it right down to, going back to the earlier point about we should stop putting data onto pieces of paper, because the root of the problem in construction is the plumber or the carpenter who's walking around site with a 6-week-old drawing, and he's assembling or fixing something based on incorrect information that's going to have to be taken down and redone again because he didn't get the latest drawing from somebody, because somebody forgot along the whole supply chain to print it out, the latest copy, and and give it to the guy who's on the ground. And what he should be walking around with is, a device of some sorts that is giving him the up-to-date, latest information all the time, to avoid that situation where he's going to build something on site, which is going to have to be taken down and rebuilt, and it's going to cost somebody some time or money, or cause some disruption, etc. So that has to be the future. We have to get away from. That was my point. We've got to move away from paper. It's just it's causing so many problems.
Sure. I'm not sure specifically about paper.
I am. Like, as an architect working on projects for nearly 30 years, I can tell you the things that have gone on site, and often the clients might not even see that people have worked with old, outdated information and literally had to take down large chunks of construction because they were working off now somebody has to pay for that. Usually that cost is put onto some poor subcontractor, because the client has signed a fixed contract with the main contractor, and but it's costing time, it's costing money, it's causing disruption, and that's happening more often than you can imagine if you're not on site seeing that happen. But it's it's causing huge problems, and any contractor, any subcontractor would probably be able to tell you that.
Yes, that's having outdated information, obviously a big culprit in that. But well,
and paper is the problem, because the minute you print it, the very next minute after you've printed it, it's out of date because somebody's carries on. The work carries on.
It's the same thing for an IFC file. Once it's saved, it's out of date.
Coming back to your point, John, that everything needs to be connected and live.
But for example, maybe the device you were talking about, that's the plumber on site has, it's actually a small A4 printer where he can print in the morning the exact, let's say, pipes he will have to lay out during this next 4 hours. And if we have softwares clever enough to actually print exactly the correct, let's say, visualization of his work for the morning, so we actually paper became the device. It's generated automatically, and it's become like the last view of the model, and it's actually pretty convenient to carry around on site.
That's Simon's innovation hat. He's coming up with solutions all of the time. So my sister has just started a role as a document controller in a construction company, and they obviously identify this as a problem, Ralph. And she was telling me that in the meetings, the plumbers, etc., and the other stakeholders don't want to learn the software that helps disseminate this information. The construction doesn't want to pay for the iPads and the devices and the training to put this real-time information in the subcontractor's hands. So there's the whole practical element of removing paper as well that I think is another challenge that would have to be overcome, and perhaps a printer in every van could be the solution.
Yeah. Well, for instance, I think it costs about 300 euros to core drill a hole through concrete with a diamond driller. Okay. So because somebody forgot to
an half a day of work. So
and it costs 300 euros for an iPad. So one hole in the concrete because you missed the hole versus an iPad which somebody could use for a couple of months on site. Of course, the contractor can claim for because the engineer left it off the drawing, and so he can claim a variation, but he can't claim a variation for the iPad, and that's the problem. Is the contract is all messed up. The contract is suited to people making mistakes rather than avoiding mistakes. But anyway, we could probably talk for hours on this thing. But it's I think the industry is really at a very low point when it gets to on the ground and how it operates with information, and a lot of construction happens with very poor information, very outdated information, and people have learned to just get by and get the thing done and get the job finished, working with poor information, and therefore they don't really appreciate the value of good information. But of course, getting the job done is not the aim. Like getting the job done correctly and to a high level of quality is probably a better aim. But we've come to the hour, so I don't want to start a whole new discussion. John, do you have any final thoughts, comments, questions, or?
No, I just wanted to thank Simon for his time, and I would also, before I forget, like to bring up the fact that we now have a new AEC Hive innovation platform where anybody can go onto the platform and describe how they might be thinking about building and delivering purpose-driven solutions to the construction industry, like Simon's idea here about putting a printer in every tradesperson's van. And it's really a place, if you're listening, you've managed to listen up until this stage, where you can go describe your idea and pretty much put it out there for discussion with the community. And there's all kinds of people on there, from clients, contractors, designers, etc., all focused on AEC solutions. So really encourage you to go along and check that out. And maybe, Simon, we might see some of the BIM 42 tools and future tools featured on there. And we look forward to seeing more of those. So thanks again.
I'll look into. Thanks for having me.
Yes, and from my side as well, Simon, a really interesting discussion. It's fantastic to get the perspective of somebody who's been on both sides, if you like, with BIM, but also now on the real estate development side, and just understanding the sort of needs of the property real estate sector and bringing your insight. So really enjoyed that. So thank you very much from my side.
My pleasure.
Do you have any final thoughts or comments or words of inspiration for the AEC community?
No, not really a word of inspiration, but I really want to thank you for this conversation and having me on the show. It was great fun. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks very much. Okay.